Smash the like button if you think that it would have been a bad business decision if Bret Hart held the WWF World Heavyweight Championship for a 5 to 6 year span during the 90s. That would have been from 1993 all the way to 98 or 99. It's laughable.
Now, I must say this. Bret Hart is still one of my favorite fake pro wrestlers of all time. I would say I would pick him over Shawn Michaels. I like Bret Hart over Shawn Michaels during their primes. But this dude is going crazy. This man just said that Vince McMahon was going to give him a 6-year world title reign at WrestleMania if he was going to beat Yokozuna. I'm like, bro, that does not add up. And now he wants to blame Hulk Hogan for that failure. First off, you can't blame Hollywood Hogan just because you lost at WrestleMania. Listen, there's no way in hell that Vince McMahon was going to give you a 6-year title reign. I'm like, that's cap. I'm like, most likely Vince McMahon probably pitched the idea, but it was not a fact. It was more so probably an idea. I think he's lying. Most likely Vince McMahon pitched the idea of possibly giving Bret Hart a 6-year title reign, more so as a fantasy, but I don't think it was a fact. It was more so an idea on the sales floor, but it never came true because it was a bad idea. I don't know why Bret Hart said he was going to have a 6-year title reign if he was going to beat Yokozuna at WrestleMania. That makes no sense because by that same logic, you beat Yoko months later for the world title. And last time I checked, Vince McMahon did not give you a 6-year title reign. And also, Shawn Michaels was on that roster. There's no way in hell that Shawn Michaels would sit around and allow you to have a 6-year title reign in the mid-90s? Hell no. This is Shawn Michaels. There's no way in hell that Shawn Michaels was going to allow you to hold that world title all the way until 1998. That's false. That's cap. Because there's Rocky Maivia, there's Taker, there's Stone Cold Steve Austin, there's Kane. What about Diesel? What about Razor Ramon? The roster was too stacked for you to hold that title for 6 years. First off, anything could happen. The time frame wouldn't make sense, right? Because last time I checked, the audience turned on Bret Hart over Stone Cold Steve Austin. They wanted Austin. They did not want you. So most likely, let's say Vince McMahon gave Bret a long title reign. Most likely, Stone Cold would have ended that title reign. That's my take. Most likely, Psycho Sid, Taker, Diesel would have ended that title reign. Because in the mid-90s, it was not that great when it came to ratings, right? In the mid-90s, the new generation era was not that great. So why would Vince McMahon give you, of all people, a 6-year title reign? Hell, I would rather see Roman Reigns hold the belt for over 6 years, but not Bret Hart. That's crazy. First off, Bret Hart was not a great promo, but he was a great fake pro wrestler, but not a great promo. So why would Vince McMahon make the audience suffer with a 6-year Bret Hart title reign? That's false. That's cap. I mean, come on. We had Savio Vega. We had Tatanka. We had X-Pac, the 1, 2, 3 Kid. We had Duke, the Dumpster Droese, who was mega over in that era. We had Bam Bam Bigelow. We had, who else? Dr. Isaac Yankem, Dr. DDS. That roster was stacked. So there's no way in hell there's no way in hell that Vince McMahon would give you a fucking 6-year title reign, bruh. Dukes, the Dumpster Droese, was mega over. People need to realize that was a great roster. It just had bad booking. Who else? They had Davey Boy Smith, Lex Luger, Yoko. Vince McMahon loved Yoko. There's no way in hell that Bret Hart would hold that belt for that long with all that talent. Here's why. During that era, during that time period, Vince McMahon played hot potato with the world title. From Shawn to Bret, Psycho Sid, Taker, Diesel. That was a hot potato world championship. So there's no proof, there's no evidence to support Bret Hart saying he was scheduled to have a 6-year title reign. And this man wants to blame Hollywood Hogan? I believe Hollywood Hogan left the company back in, 1994? So where's your proof? What about 95, 96, 97? Why didn't Vince McMahon give you a 6-year title reign the moment Hollywood Hogan left? What's your excuse? Nothing. You have no evidence. You have no proof. Why are you ignoring the years when Hollywood Hogan was in WCW? Why didn't Vince McMahon give you a world title reign that was 6 years? By that same logic, where's Hogan? Where's the big bad boogeyman Hogan to ruin your title reign? He was gone. He was gone at that point. So there's no proof, there's no evidence. Man, that would have been death for the World Wrestling Federation. And I'm saying this as a huge fan of Bret Hart. Like I said, I would pick Bret over Shawn Michaels. Like I said, I'm being objective because I was a huge fan of Bret Hart in the 90s over Shawn Michaels. I was never a huge fan of Shawn Michaels. I was always a Bret Hart guy. But during that time period, back in 92, 95, 94, it was not that great for the company. So why would Vince McMahon do that? Give you, of all people, a long-ass title reign with all that talent? You had Waylon Mercy, you had Ted DiBiase. It was a stacked roster. You had, who else? Coco Beware, baby. Lex Luger. Who else? Fucking Bob Backlund. It was a very good roster. You had, who else? Roddy Piper. Also, Vince McMahon was a huge fan of Psycho Sid. He was a massive fan of Psycho Sid. There's no way that Bret Hart would be a world champion over Psycho Sid in that time period. Vince McMahon was going to make sure that Psycho Sid held that belt. Vince McMahon was a massive fan of Diesel, Shawn Michaels, Taker. Those were his guys. I mean, Vince McMahon did like Bret Hart, but not to a point where he would give Bret a long-ass title reign for 6 years. That's insane in the membrane. I am so tired of all these fake pro wrestlers lying on Vince McMahon's name with no proof or evidence. Why can a podcaster interview Vince McMahon to confirm these stories? That's what they should do. Vince McMahon should sit down and do a podcast, right? Let's go down all these fake ass stories about Vince McMahon. Let's settle this. I would love for Conrad Thompson to interview Vince McMahon and do a podcast with Vince, so Vince McMahon can confirm all these bullshit lies about his name for the past 40-something years. He needs to call out Bret Hart because I think Bret is a fucking liar. It makes no sense for Bret Hart to have a 6-year title reign, especially in that era. I'm talking about when it came to fan interest. Nobody was checking for the World Wrestling Federation at that time. They were struggling until Stone Cold Steve Austin rose and saved the company. But before Stone Cold Steve Austin, Bret and Shawn, they were struggling as top guys. So it makes no sense, right? Hell, I can't imagine Shawn Michaels having a 6-year title reign. Listen, give me a 6-year Roman Reigns title reign over a Bret Hart 6-year title reign any day of the fucking week. I'm not saying Roman is better. He's not. I'm not saying that Roman is better than Bret Hart, but he's more entertaining than Bret Hart, right? So you have to count all factors, right? Why would you give a guy a long-ass title reign if he's boring? That makes no sense. Hell, you might as well give Bob Backlund a damn near 6-year title reign. By that same logic, Bret was not that entertaining. So why would Vince McMahon do that? I can see Vince McMahon giving Hollywood Hogan a 6-year title reign because Hogan was over. Hogan was entertaining. Hogan did not have to wrestle every fucking week to be entertaining. So that's why Hogan will forever be better than Bret Hart. I would say Bret Hart would be last on my list of fake pro wrestlers that I would give a 6-year title reign to. How about Psycho Sid? How about Taker? Guys like that, Razor Ramon, but not Bret Hart. He was never entertaining. So I can see Roman Reigns having a 4-year title reign. That did make sense. He was very captivating. He was very entertaining. But if a guy is only known as a great fake pro wrestler in the ring, that's not enough to give him a long-ass title reign. I'm sorry, that's not enough. You need promos. You need great angles. You need great feuds. Hell, the best feud of Bret's career is Stone Cold Steve Austin because Austin was entertaining. You see? That's my point. The company would be struggling if Vince McMahon gave Bret a 6-year title reign. So let's map this out. I'm talking about 93 all the way until 1998. Hell no. I cannot imagine Bret being a world champion heading into the Attitude Era. Hell no, bruh. Stone Cold, Rocky Maivia, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Kane, Taker, Mankind. It was too deep. Bret did not belong in that era. Yes, Bret Hart had great matches, but it ends there. Bret Hart had boring-ass feuds. His two best feuds were with Jerry Lawler and Stone Cold Steve Austin. That is a fact. I think people overhype Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart based on their backstage heat, but on TV, no. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart never had a great feud on TV. I would say Bret's best feuds were with Jerry the King Lawler and Stone Cold Steve Austin, and maybe Owen Hart, but that's about it. It was not Shawn. What about Mabel? What about Waylon Mercy? What about Ahmed Johnson, Goldust, Dr. Isaac Yankem? Vince McMahon had talent in that era. There's no way that Bret Hart would hog up all the spotlight away from those talents. Go back and watch Duke, the Dumpster, Drozy. That man was mega over. What about the Goon? The Goon was mega over. The 1, 2, 3 Kid, Savio Vega, Tatanka. What about Mantar? What about Kona Crush? What about Adam Bomb? Like I said, Vince McMahon had talent on that roster in that time period. Let's talk about the 4-year title reign of Roman Reigns. Yes, it did make sense because at that time, nobody else was on the level of Roman Reigns until Cody Rhodes. Once Cody Rhodes came along, they had no choice but to end Roman Reigns' title reign. So that's my point. What I'm saying is, back in 94, 95, Vince McMahon had enough talent on the roster to give multiple guys world championships. Vader, Taker, Psycho Sid, etc. Not just Bret Hart. Roman Reigns was different. The World Wrestling Federation, they put all their eggs in his basket, and that was a huge mistake until Cody Rhodes came along and saved the company. Yes, Cody Rhodes saved the company. Literally, Vince McMahon had nobody else in mind to dethrone Roman Reigns. These are facts. Look it up. Vince McMahon, Triple H, they had no plans to end the Roman Reigns title reign until Cody Rhodes came along. There was nobody else. Not Drew, not Seth, not fucking Brock. Nobody else was on the level of Roman Reigns to end that title reign until Cody Rhodes came back to the company. So let's compare Roman and Bret. So, was Bret the biggest draw on the roster back in what, 94, 95? Hell no, he was not the biggest draw. So why would Vince McMahon do that? With Roman, that was different. Roman was the biggest draw for the last 4 years of his title reign. But let's compare that to Bret Hart. Bret Hart was not the biggest draw on the roster. In my opinion, I think that Taker was the biggest draw on the roster. Okay, these were the biggest draws around that time during Bret's prime. It was Psycho Sid, Taker, and I would say that's about it. People were not that crazy about Shawn Michaels. People were not that crazy about Bret Hart. It was more so Psycho Sid and Taker. Also, people loved Razor Ramon. My God, Razor Ramon was so fucking over. He was the most popular guy on the roster who was not a top guy. I would say around that time period, Vince McMahon did not know who was the face of his company because it was not Shawn, it was not Bret. I believe that Vince McMahon wanted Psycho Sid to be the face of the company, but Psycho Sid was not reliable. So that means Vince McMahon had to rely on Taker, Shawn, Bret, Diesel, etc. I can't believe that Bret is still bitter after all these years. Here's what I mean. How dare you blame Hollywood Hogan for the fact that Vince McMahon did not give you a 6-year title reign? Because Hogan left. Vince McMahon gave you multiple title reigns the moment Hollywood Hogan left for WCW, so why would you blame Hogan? That makes no fucking sense. Okay, how about this logic? Why didn't Vince McMahon give Bret Hart a 6-year title reign back in what, 95, 96? You see, that's called logic. Hogan was nowhere near the company at that time period. Okay, so by that same logic, what stopped Bret Hart from becoming a 6-year champion once Hollywood Hogan left? That's my point. Bret Hart is capping. He's all cap. Listen, I love Bret as a fake pro wrestler, but this man has a nasty habit of blaming everybody for his fucking failures. It's crazy. He wants to blame Bill Goldberg for everything, but last time I checked, he wrestled Terry Funk in a hardcore match after Goldberg hurt him. So what about that? Bret Hart wrestled a couple of more times after Goldberg hurt him. So who's to blame here? Listen, all I'm saying is that caught my attention because that's my era. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Diesel, Taker, Duke, the Dumpster Drozy. 95, 94. That's my era. So when Bret Hart says, hey, I was supposed to be a 6-year champion, well, I call bullshit because I watched that era every year. That's my era. There's no way in hell that Vince McMahon was going to allow that, especially Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels was a spoiled brat backstage. Just imagine the heat between Bret and Shawn. If Bret was allowed to hold the belt for 6 years, that's why I call bullshit on Bret Hart saying that. There's so much proof and evidence to back up my comments based on Diesel. Diesel was super green, and yet Vince McMahon gave that man a long title reign. Vince McMahon loves big men. Look at Taker, look at Diesel, look at Psycho Sid. Vince McMahon loved big men. Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, he was big. So there's no way that small Bret Hart will hold the belt that long in that time period.